Welcome to another episode of NBM Talks, a series of the Narrative-Based Medicine Lab, where we speak with individuals who are working at the intersection of literature, medicine, and health. Our guests are writers, clinicians, scholars, artists, and advocates who are pushing the boundaries of what's possible in the field. Together we discuss how we can engage with narrative-based medicine principles and practices in creative and diverse ways. We hope you enjoy this episode. Our guest today is Dr. Monica Kidd, an award-winning multidisciplinary writer, journalist, and physician. She has published 8 books of fiction, poetry, and non-fiction, including her new novel, The Crane, and her creative work has appeared in many literary magazines, winning the Edna Stabler Award for Personal Essay and National Magazine Awards. Previously a reporter with CBC, her freelance writing has been featured in the Walrus, Canadian Geographic, Alberta Views, and other outlets. Monica studied ecology and evolutionary biology, then attended medical school at Memorial University. She now works as a family doctor specializing in child and maternal health, medical humanities, and equity. She has teaching roles at the University of Calgary and Memorial University and serves as Associate Editor of Humanities at the Canadian Medical Association Journal. She divides her time between Calgary and St. John's and is a mother of 3, and I haven't even mentioned that she's also a filmmaker, letterpress publisher, and Antarctic expedition guide. Today, Monica Kidd joins us from Calgary.
Thank you, Damien.
So, Monica, I mentioned that you're a physician, novelist, poet, journalist, filmmaker, mother, and much else. Could you tell us first a little bit about your work as a health practitioner and a writer in particular? How did you come to be interested in doing both of these things?
Oh, yeah, sure. Well, I was a writer first, to be honest with you. I wrote a couple of novels before I went to medical school. And so and before I did that, I was working as a reporter for the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. So I was always a writer first. And I ended up wanting to go to medical school to be a little bit more concrete in my work. Being a journalist and being a writer, I think makes really critical contributions to the world. But sometimes a practical minded person also wants to be able to just set a broken bone or deliver a baby. Especially when you come from a place like I did, where I grew up, where, practical life skills are probably valued a little bit more than esoteric jobs, which writing can certainly feel like. So I went to medical school, and I eventually became a family doctor. And I wasn't writing a whole lot when I was in medical training. I did publish a couple of books of poetry, so I was writing sort of episodically, and I was writing essays, but it takes a lot of mental space and time to write a longer piece of prose to kind of keep that world that you're trying to build alive and inhabit it. And I was trying to become a doctor and having babies myself, and there was no time for that. But so it's become kind of it's always been a parallel thing. The writing has always been a parallel thing to the medical work.
And I'm really interested in what you've just said. Well, all of it, but especially in what you've just said, because there's so much a question for our audience about balancing or juggling or bringing together writing and medical practice, both, as you mentioned, as a pragmatic question of what there's time to do, but also in terms of your writing as a practice and your medical work as a practice. Do you see them informing each other or helping each other, or are they in competition? How do you experience that?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. In some ways, I can't really answer it because I'm only one of me. I don't have like a case control, I don't know. But it's a question I'm asked a lot, right? Like, how does being a writer affect the way you practice medicine, or how does being a doctor affect the way you write? It's really hard to answer that question when you're in the middle of it. But I think encountering people in moments when they come to you for help or understanding or clarity, it's a real privilege. And when you see people in moments of vulnerability and you see how they respond to conflict, tension, crisis. That's a very writerly kind of activity to do, because when you think about writing, you think about scene, context, you think about character, you think about conflict and tension, and then you think about choices, and all of that together becomes plot. If we're thinking about prose, and uh, meeting so many people in so many different situations gives you kind of a crash course in all the different ways a person can live a life, and ways that they can respond. And so I think that working in a medical field exposes you to a lot of story. And often writing feels almost more like curation than creation, because we're always influenced by what we see and what we experience. And so I think that's one of the big ways that medicine affects me, or has influenced me as a writer. Um, Also, I think medicine teaches you that almost nothing is clear cut, almost nothing is straightforward, and that you have to be able to make a kind of peace with uncertainty, and yet still try to help relieve suffering, still try to get clarity. And those are very deep, basic human experiences. So that, I think, that informs writing for sure. How the writing informs medicine is really a lot harder for me to wrap my head around, um, because I don't know medicine without being a writer, if you get me. Um, but certainly, I think that being a writer trains you to think about the gaps, to think about what people maybe are not sharing or not seeing, and what inhabits those gaps. Um, and I think too, in moments when I've really been in my own head about something, maybe it's a difficult encounter, or maybe I don't know what's going on diagnostically, or how to help somebody, or we've tried X, Y, and Z. I don't know where to go next. In those moments of deep uncertainty, personal uncertainty and professional uncertainty, I think that being a writer also trains you to take yourself out of the situation, and to look at the story, and to see how, kind of to get behind the camera, if you will, and to think about what is unfolding here, which I think is it it's always been helpful for me in those difficult times.
Well, it's such a fascinating answer. You've given me tons to think about, tons that I'd like to follow up on. Really, what you said at the beginning about the privilege of receiving stories that I think sometimes in narrative-based medicine or at the lab, we do sort of emphasize the difficulty or the burden rather than the honor. And I remember now one of our participants saying, "Well, I don't have writer's block because 40 people tell me their stories every day, so I have
Yeah.
constant material."
Yeah.
And the last thing you mentioned about the gaps and the blockages reminded me of one of our other collaborators, Jay Baruch, who has an exercise where he says, write about someone at the moment words fail them, and trying to get into that moment that you're describing, where it might not feel propitious, it might feel blocked or paralyzed or difficult, but there's ways to use that moment or that challenge as a story.
I love that. That's an amazing prompt. I
Oh,
might have
yeah.
to steal that for myself.
I'm glad to hear it. I was actually it actually sort of leads into my my next question, which is about prompts and about exercises, I guess, generally. You started to answer it, but maybe even more concretely. Someone wants to be Monica Kidd. Someone wants to be writing as you do. What's your advice for the writer starting out, or even just aesthetic advice? What are your tools and your methods to begin and see through the creative work?
Oh my goodness. My first advice would be like, run away, not from creativity, but don't ever try to do what I do or be me, because I don't even know what I'm doing half the time. It's like feeling your way forward through something. But I guess know that I have a writerly moment. I once was asked to write, Shane Nielsen, who I'm sure you know,
Hmm.
once asked me to write about the pre-poem moment. Pre-poem moment. So, what is the signal to you that that a poem is about to happen, or a poem is possible, or a poem wants to be written? What is the signal? And I think for me, a signal that there's something deep and rich that needs to be explored is when I feel surprised, or when I feel shaken, or when I connect to seemingly unconnected things. That's always a moment to me to kind of just slow down and pay attention. Uh, and because I write across different genre, I'm not always sure what format something is going to take, but I think my approach, I don't know if I've ever really articulated this for myself, but I think my approach is just to slow down and notice everything, and to discount nothing. So you don't, and maybe this gets back to the curation part, where you're just being a magpie. You're just collecting, 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 and you don't necessarily know what's important, what's not important, what connects to another thing. But you'll never get that moment back. So sit there and be with it. And then maybe later, I hardly ever finish anything in the moment. Like people often ask, well, how do you write your poems? After a patient encounter, do you sit down and write a poem? No, it never happens that way. I collect little phrases or images, but it might be 5 years before I come back to something. It might be 10 minutes, who knows? But unless I get down all the data in the moment, then I won't I won't remember what moved me. I guess that's where I would start. And then in terms of, I think one of your other questions was like tools in terms of format, like
Hmm.
what are the practical issues of, like, is this a poem? Is this a story? Is this a film? Sometimes it's opportunistic, right? Sometimes you don't really know. But I do feel like if plot is an important element of an experience I want to communicate, then maybe that's a signal that it's prose. Whereas if there's more liminality to a situation, like a search for understanding, or I don't know all the details, but I know that I felt something in a moment, then maybe that's more of a poetry kind of moment, maybe.
Hmm. Maybe this is a good time to start talking about The Crane, your new novel, which I'd love to hear more about, and our audience is interested in hearing more about as well. Did you know from the beginning what it was going to be, or did it begin with a process of magpie collection? And
Oh my gosh, that one nearly killed me, to be totally honest. I wrote that book over 8 years, and I knew that it was going to be fiction. That's all I knew. And I knew that I had this sort of, I had this rumor that really sort of lit me up, that I wanted to explore and inhabit. And the rumor was that, so we spend a month of every summer usually in Newfoundland, and we have a cabin on an island in Notre Dame Bay. It's called the Bay of Exploits. And there was a story there that on one of the bigger islands, two people from who'd resisted the Vietnam War had come and set up shop basically in a house. So there's in Newfoundland in the 1950s and 60s, there was this social engineering experiment called resettlement, where the Joey Smallwood, the first premier of Newfoundland, said, listen, everything is too expensive. Health is too expensive. Education, travel is too expensive. We need to centralize communities. And so there was a program to empty out the smaller communities on the periphery and bring them into the central places. So it left all of these houses in fairly remote places. And it was quite delicious to me, this idea that if you were going to leave somewhere and you needed to hide, what a perfect place to hide. And also maybe to heal. So I wanted to explore that, and I fumbled around with that for the longest time until I started doing more and more and more and more historical research. And I realized people who left the States to resist the Vietnam War didn't have to hide. So then I sort of lost the basic premise of my book. But I still wanted to put somebody who'd resisted the Vietnam War in Newfoundland. So I then had to do a bunch of backpedaling and plot creation and trying to figure out plausible situations. So I took a young man from Wyoming who, for various reasons, finds himself in Newfoundland, not necessarily to stay, but is surprised by what he finds and does eventually find a kind of healing.
It sounds wonderful. It sounds fascinating. It sounds like you had to be quite accepting of it changing as it grew, and accepting of what it was going to be and what it wanted to be. Does that sound right? Is that a fair characterization?
Yeah, I think so. And I that's kind of a big theme for me, as I would say, as a writer and as an editor, is trying to, like, we often feel married to the words because it takes so much effort to string them together and to try to say something, and especially for people who might be writing from their own life experience, um, to realize that the story needs something different. That can be a really, really difficult thing to face as a writer. Uh, but I always try to remember and try to say to people that I'm editing for that you have to listen to what the story wants. You have to listen to what the characters want. And that can sound really airy-fairy and hand-wavy, a little bit metaphysical. Um, but we have to, as individuals, sort of detach from our ego when it comes to writing in many, many cases. So yes, I had to be open to that. The problem is when you're open to change, but you don't know what the change should be. That's the frustrating part. And that requires a lot of writing and unwriting and writing yourself into blind alleys
Yeah,
and then eventually finding some way out of it. Yeah,
and handling uncertainty, like you said before.
that's right. Yeah.
We have a handout at the lab where, for our writing groups and workshops and editing, where the line on it is, one of the lines on it is, it really happened that way is not
Yeah.
justification for what's happening in the story. And
Yes.
it's really hard for everyone to
Yes, it
accept.
is.
Yeah.
And that actually that's an interesting thing. There's a really difficult thing to grapple with as a writer and as an editor. But this is the way it happened. Well, absolutely, but you are not writing what happened. You are writing a version of what happened, and you're writing to reach some kind of clarity or message or meaning or something that wasn't apparent in that moment, and it comes back to the curation. Like, some details may not need to be in there because they don't fit what this piece needs to say, because every story is crafted. Every story is, even a photo, like even a very realistic photo is not reality. It's still a representation of reality. And I think the struggle we have as writers and people being edited is that when somebody says that needs to come out of the story, it can feel like a negation of your own experience. And that's not what it is about. It's about letting the story be primary.
You've mentioned one of your other hats very helpfully for me, your work as an editor. So you've been on the other side of the table. You've been both a writer, you are both a writer and editor. You're the humanities editor now at the Canadian Medical Association Journal. So you have a role where you're working with writers and looking for for new writing at in the health humanities and narrative-based medicine and reflective writing within health more generally. What are you looking for in particular in that role?
Yeah. I work on the encounters part of the humanities section of the Canadian Medical Association Journal. So there's also Society in Medicine and Trust in Healthcare, and there's some other elements of the under that humanities banner. So I do one part of that. And always we work in a team. So I am, I'm the person who has that hat right now, but we always work in a team. We always have at least 2 senior editors reading a piece, and then pieces get peer reviewed. So I have my own opinions, and then there's also kind of the collective and what the journal needs and these kinds of things. But me as personally, what I look for. So I guess to back up, the encounters, the encounters column, these are personal essays based on some, as you might have guessed, encounter with the medical system, either as a provider or as a patient or as a family member. Anything that can be loosely described as an encounter with medicine. And they're personal essays, and they're 1,400 words, less than 1,400 words. So that's kind of the format. And within that, what always lights me up in a piece that gets submitted is something that has a good use of language, and that shows me that the author sees themselves in a larger context, and also kind of beats down, especially, and this is mostly true for people who are healthcare practitioners. I'm always looking for those pieces that sort of beat down that trope of I am but a humble servant. Many pieces come to me, and somebody has had a deeply moving personal experience. Common ones are responding to a code for the first time. Someone's heart stops and you're doing chest compressions, or having to pronounce somebody dead for the first time. These are deeply moving experiences for people. And it's very easy to have an experience like that and then to come to the conclusion that it will forever change you and it will forever make you a better doctor, for example. And some of those moments do that for sure, but it's an easy pattern for us to fall into as medical writers, I think. And so I like pieces that find subtle ways to break that down. And always I'm looking for pieces that don't just reach for the tidy conclusion. It's 1,400 words. You want to come to, how do you end a 1,400 piece word? You've hardly gotten started in many cases. And also in medical education, we're schooled in the SOAP note. So there's something happens. There's what I think about it. There's what I think the diagnosis is, and then it ends with a plan, right? And so we're just kind of trained in this, there must be a plan, there must be a message, there must be a moral at the end, there must be a point to me telling you this story. And I think people get fussed by that more than I wish they would. Often when I'm reading a story, I just want to be taken into a place that kind of wakes me up or jostles me a little bit and makes me think. My conclusion might be different than your conclusion, but at least there's a conversation happening. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, and I'm reminded of our friend and lab collaborator Alan Peterkin and his comment that diagnosis is an anti-narrative act, and narration is all about those thick layers and uncertainty and questioning and the seeing where the story goes and not knowing necessarily what to do with it as it happens.
Right.
I'm a bit worried though that I can hear in the background thousands of files being deleted and manuscripts being torn up. So maybe we should say, if you have written the story of your first code or your first F, that is a good place to start. It simply means
Absolutely.
that you have not come to the end of your writing journey, but you've taken a valuable first step. Is that a Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And
Okay.
we publish lots of stories that are on those firsts in medicine. 100% we do. But then there are just other elements of that make them more subtle or make them slightly surprising, um, that give them deep value, I think.
Well, my own bias would be that it's often that awareness of craft and language that you mentioned. That there's only so many events that we can write about. There's an infinite way to approach them and make them new.
Yeah, I think that people who are writing, writing a reflective piece like this, maybe for the first time, or not the first time, but maybe haven't done it a whole lot, really have trouble breaking out of the medical expert role.
Mm.
They feel something deep. They want to make connections with people, and they want to be creative, but they have spent 10 or 15 or 20 years writing in a very kind of passive tone and being told that their greatest aspiration is to be the expert and to control the situation. And it can be very threatening to leave that aside for a minute and to think about human experience in another way. It can be really difficult for people.
Okay. We could go on all day, I think. I feel like I could ask you 1,000 more questions, but I'm just going to ask you a couple more because you've mentioned the encounters and we've mentioned the crane, we've mentioned some of your other projects. Is there anything else new or developing that you can tell us about or that you'd like to preview or that's coming down the pipe?
Oh, for me creatively, you mean?
Yeah, or whatever.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm hard at work. I just actually finished a master's of fine arts in creative nonfiction, and I've been working on a book about coastal erosion globally. I've been traveling to different places to ask basically the question how people confront um, the loss of land and the loss of memory and heritage when sea level rise and worsening storms kind of encroach on your experience, physical and otherwise. And I am hard at work on that. And I'm also sort of on the side of my desk working on a collection of poems. Um, I'm really intrigued by people who can write a collection of poems that ends up being one complete story. I've tried to do that in the past and it's really hard, but I think I finally have the thing that may allow me to do that. And it's the story of Jeanne Barré, who was a 17th century French woman who disguised her gender in order to be able to sail around the world on a botanizing expedition. And as someone who spent some time at sea and somebody who has spent some time in the field, um, that's something I can really inhabit, I think. So I'm working on those two things while, going to clinic and raising kids and stuff.
Wow. I hope that you'll come back and you can tell us about those two projects when they're books.
Yeah, I'd love to.
And in the meantime, if people want to find out more about your work or seek out your publications, what's the best way for them to do that?
Oh yeah, I've got a website that people can go to. I'm all over the socials, and I have a website. It's just my name, monicakid.ca. So there's way more information than you would ever want over there.
I doubt that. Thanks so much, Monica. It's been fascinating to speak with you and hear. I feel like this is just the tip of the iceberg. You're doing so many fascinating, productive, and wonderful creative things, and really, you're an exemplar. You're a model for everything that we're trying to do at the lab. So thank you for being with us today.
Oh, thank you, Damien. And it's a real honor to be on your podcast.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this conversation, check out many other episodes. And if you're interested in learning more about narrative-based medicine, visit us online at narrativebasedmedicine.ca for more great content and to explore our upcoming offerings.